Nigerian state governors under the aegis of Nigerian Governors Forum said they recognize Executive Order 10, as was signed last year by President Muhammadu Buhari, but would not be stampeded by it in their relationship with the judicial arm of government in their various states. This appears to be a response to expectations of a timely resolution to the ongoing industrial action by members of the Judiciary Staff Union of Nigeria, which has played havoc with court activities across the country. Joining us now from our Rise Abuja studio for a conversation is Dr. Daniel Bwala, legal practitioner and member, Lincoln's Inn London, and member of All Progressives Congress. We'll also take him up on some other issues affecting his party's preparations for the 2023 elections. Welcome to the program. Dr. Bwala, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you to Dr. Abati and Mr. Rufai.
Good morning, Daniel Bwala. Thank you for joining us. Well, the Judicial Staff Union of Nigeria, the members have been on strike now for more than close to 2 weeks, and activities in courts across the country have been grounded. Now, the whole issue is about financial autonomy for the judiciary. And the contentious issue from the point of view of the governors is Executive Order number 10. And they've been saying they'll wait for the president to return and certain issues there will be resolved. And we've been getting mixed messaging from the governors. Is the Executive Order number 10 superior to the Constitution, which expressly provides for financial autonomy for the legislature and also the judiciary at the state levels? And what really, in your opinion, is a contention of the governors?
Well, thank you for having me. The Executive Order 10, as couched, actually, if you look at it literally, can create a little bit of confusion because of the mixture of two things. For example, the preamble up to the first order, I believe, is constitutional and is pursuant to the provisions of the Constitution if you look at Section 5. But from number 2 of the executive order that runs down, there are matters that can be debated because they look like directing the states, and which, if it is so, then it must be enacted by an act of the National Assembly, because if the president proceeds on that, then it will amount to what we call executive legislation. That is to say, executive order, although it is constitutional, but executive orders are always subject to judicial review. Even in the United States, when recently after the lockdown, Donald Trump wanted to force the economy to be open, but because states have put restrictions, he signed an executive order forcing the state to open up the economies of their state. They contested it. Thankfully, the matter was resolved before they even had to go to the court. But if you look at, for example, Roosevelt, who has the highest number of executive orders, most of the executive orders that he signed were challenged and the court had to interpret. There were cases where the court held that those orders are within the inherent powers of the president, and there are some that the court held they are within the purview of the Congress. Now, when you bring it to Nigeria, let's take a look at them one after the other. Does the president have power to sign an executive order? The answer is yes, and the support is the Constitution, Section 5. If you look at Section 5 of the Constitution, it has subsection 1 and subsection 2. Subsection 1 is the inherent powers of the president, powers that are not expressly stated, but they come along with the office of the president. And then subsection 2 are powers that are expressed by statutes, by law, to which the president must enforce. Because the powers of the president under Section 5 is the scope of the power is the Federation of Nigeria, which includes the federal capital and the states in some cases. Just like in court, when you bring an application for whatever you're asking the court for, when you bring the relevant rules under which you bring the application, you will also couch right in the heading and under the inherent powers of this honorable court. There are powers that are inherent with the court that are not expressly stated, but the powers are required to give effect to the rules of court or to give effect to the laws as interpreted by court. So the same thing. Section 5, subsection 1, it says, subject to the provision of this Constitution, the executive powers of the Federation shall be vested in the President. That power he exercised through himself, Vice President or ministers or public officers of the Federation. But subsection 2 now prescribes specific powers, which is powers that are enacted by an act of the National Assembly, powers that are, although today not enacted, but as the National Assembly has the power to enact, and then such other powers. Now, executive order is flowing from subsection 1, which is the power to give effect to the Constitution, because its duty is to maintain, promote, and enforce the Constitution throughout the Federal Republic. Now, what the President sought to enforce was section 121 and subsection 3, which says that money that is charged to the House of Assembly or to the judiciary shall be paid directly to them. The couching of 121 sub 3 by itself is self-commanding, meaning that every governor within the Federation must see to it that the Constitution is enforced by ensuring that monies appropriated in the budget for these two branches of government at the state level should be sent to them directly. However, since last year when this law was signed, you have seen that only 5 states or thereabout that were able to implement grudgingly. The rest of the other states have failed to do that. And this is the only time you find the entire governors being unanimous and bipartisan. That explains the selfishness with which governors run the state. And look at the Constitution, where the Constitution expressly provides for an act to be performed by a governor. If the governor fails to perform the act, now the Constitution has not specifically stated what should be done. It is in this kind of scenario that the President invoked the inherent powers that he has, because he has a duty to maintain the Constitution. He has a duty to enforce it. So through that inherent powers, he will make attempt to enforce that Constitution. The good thing about separation of power is that it can always be reviewed by the court as to whether it has gone beyond his bounds or it has not gone beyond his bound. But you can see that the governors don't necessarily want to go to the Supreme Court, because Supreme Court has original jurisdiction right off the cuff to determine that. The reason they don't want to go, I can suggest to you, is because they know that the court must almost always interpret the executive powers as constitutional, giving effect to section 121 sub 3. The part that the President may have a problem if the matter goes to the Supreme Court, like I said earlier, if you look at the content of the executive order, is number 2, 3, and write down, because those ones are specific instruction on how the state should form committees, should do this, should do that, should do that. The federal government under separation of power cannot give such directive. So from number 2, 3, right downward can be carried to the National Assembly as a bill to be enacted, either under Amendment of Appropriation Act or can be enacted separately as Financial Autonomy Implementation Act. So that once that is done, the act has been passed by the National Assembly, the President can then pursue to do that. So the President can, in a nutshell, invoke the executive powers and order the Accountant General of the Federation to charge from source the monies and pay directly to the relevant arms of the state, because the executive is not having the money back to it. It is going back to the state, and it is not directing. It is consequent on the budget passed by the House of Assembly of that state. It is saying that what belongs to Abati, give to Abati. What belongs to Rufai, give to Rufai. If you fail to do that, we will ensure that we pay the money directly into the account of Abati and pay directly into the account of Rufai.
But the whole thing is just baffling, isn't it? You mentioned section 121 subsection 3. There's also section 81 subsection 3, unequivocal. So and we're citing the Constitution just now, talking about where the President's powers are derived. But is our Constitution even worth the paper it's printed on, when it's more often observed in the breach and everybody picks and chooses what parts they actually want to observe? And I also want to talk about this self-infantilizing that we saw. A few days ago, This Day newspaper's headline was that the governors are waiting for the President's return to act on this matter. Why would the governors do such a thing? I know the President of Nigeria is a head of state and head of government, but it is self-infantilizing. They're not children. Can you explain that?
Now, the reason why the governors say they are waiting for the president to come so they can find a solution diplomatically is because they know for a fact that if they take on the president directly to the Supreme Court for interpretation, if the court interprets in favor of the federal government, they've completely lost their powers as far as the judiciary and the legislature is concerned forever. So they would rather that they find a political solution. And in my view, they were able to cow the president sometimes back, and he conceded and said, okay, let's see how we implement. And they are coming back. I advise the president not to concede. The president should insist that there will be implementation, but the law is that if you do not want, you can sue the federal government to the Supreme Court and seek that interpretation, whether that executive order is constitutional or not constitutional. But in a nutshell, the reason why the governors decided that they are going to meet him rather than go to the court is because they are afraid. Remember, this autonomy we're talking about is to the lawmakers and to the judiciary in the state the same way it has been replicated at the federal level. And what is restructuring? These are ingredients of restructuring that the governors have clamored for. You cannot approbate and reprobate. You cannot be asking for devolution of power when you can't concede power within your level. Why should, look at, apart from Section 251 of the Constitution, which provides for the federal High Court's jurisdiction on matters that affect the government of the Federation, all other matters not covered by Section 251 are within the wider powers of the state high courts. And how can state high court continue to dispense justice without the influence of governors when their finances are being controlled? Sometimes you watch the TV, you see governors will flank some cars and say the governor gave cars to the judges, and then parade the judges as if you are parading criminals. These are monies that should have gone to them, and they determine the administration of the judiciary. And how can they also, have you seen, Tudun, in Nigeria in the last probably 10 years, where House of Assembly have stood up to their governors? They don't even legislate. He gives them what to say and how to pass it. Is that the restructuring we're talking about? Restructuring is where the arms and the organs and the instruments of government are learning and are empowered to operate independent of the order. And if the governors cannot support this, then I do not think the governors have the audacity and temerity to bring about the issue of devolution of power at the federal level. If you cannot allow, how can you appropriate money for judiciary and then begin to use the money for them? And sometimes they don't even see it. How can you appropriate money in the House of Assembly? Let's say you appropriate 10,000 for them, and then at the end of the day you spend 30,000. Is that not corruption? I'm even advising the president to proceed beyond that and sign another executive order mandating the EFCC to begin to prosecute the Accountant General of State when they fail to release directly to the respective heads of those bodies monies that are released because they are in violation of the provision of the Constitution. So the EFCC can bring an amendment to the EFCC Act that will criminalize that one so that they can proceed to then charge those Accountant General. By the time every Accountant General you appoint is being prosecuted, the governors will have to do something. As a nation, and the governors are well aware that even the media are sort of carried away. We have not focused on these governors and whether their role in governance is supporting democratic process. They run the states like personal enterprise. They give what they want and they don't give what they don't want to give. Well, nobody questions because there are no mechanisms to question them.
Well, on that note, we need to take a short break. When we return, the conversation will continue. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Still a morning show right here on the Rise News channel. We've got Dr. Daniel Bwala, legal practitioner, member of Lincoln's Inn in London, member of All Progressive Congress. And we're talking about myriads of issues today about Executive Order number 10. So the question for me will be, when are we going to stop this madness, as it were, of politics taking the place of the Constitution? Because obviously it's a level of madness. Just like we have with the local governments too, we remember how that case went. It's a back and forth always, and it's the governors having their way. If the Constitution will not be respected, should we not just suspend the Constitution in the first place? Because obviously nothing is respected in the Constitution. A very critical matter like this that has led to workers going on strike for a while, and despite the fact that we've had court judgments as regards this, and nothing is still respected. So what kind of country are we running, really?
Good, Rufai. I like the point you raised, and that comes down to the issue of enforcement. When a constitution is not respected, it means somebody is not enforcing it. You see, the executive powers of the federation lies, and over time, the way the president has been blackmailed, every left, right, and center, abusing the rule of law, not obeying the rule of law, he has come to a point where he does not take steps where necessary. Remember, we just talked about insecurity in the country. It will take him a long time to sack service chief, take him a long time to deploy the army, to take some decisive, step like the way Obasanjo was making, even to the point of violating the constitution at his time. So this thing is making the president to act slowly, but when the constitution provides for an act to be performed, if that act is not performed, the responsibility lies with the president to ensure the enforcement of that. By the rule of law, the president's act or powers to enforce is also subject to judicial review. You see, we have lazy governors, quite frankly, that are only concerned about themselves, not even their state. Because I'll prove it to you. Ordinarily, in the last 8 months, 10 months, since the passage of this, the signing of this executive order, if it were in other climes, somebody would have rushed to the Supreme Court. And in this case, it is the governors, because the president has a dominant, power. He is the one that is calling the shots. So they are supposed to approach the Supreme Court and seek interpretation. There and then we will know what is right, what is left, and then we'll be able to move on. People do not know, Mr. Rufai, quite frankly, that in this country, even under the present framework of the Constitution, that the governors are more powerful than the president. We have never profiled that. But let me give you some instances. The governor in his state determines who becomes local government chairman. We have been fighting this autonomy. Can you imagine the local government were so intimidated that even when amendment was brought to their own favor, I remember some years back, Algon rejected. House of Assembly that should have independence, but they are so intimidated by the governors that all this while autonomy was being brought, they were rejecting it until recent time, that thankfully they accepted. Judiciaries are not in a position to come out to the press and talk. So governors appoint judiciary members, judicial officers. Governor determines who become a legislator in a state. Governor determines the local government. You push the envelope further. You come to the national. The governor determines who is representative in terms of the House of Rep or the senator. They single-handedly determine at party level. If you tend to take that one away and say you're going to have direct primaries, they will kill heaven and earth to ensure they are their way. Now, they have controlled the National Assembly, right? Or they are attempting to control. Stretch it to the executive. They nominate who becomes minister. They nominate who becomes DG of MDA. They nominate who becomes ambassador. So even in the federal cabinet, they can undermine the president through the agents that they nominated. At the National Assembly, they can undermine the executive through the people they endorse to go to the National Assembly. And then when you come down to the power of the purse, in their state, there is no machinery alive and living that can checkmate what they do. So the powers of the governor in terms of accountability is left until after 8 years, when he would have done what he wanted and has gone. The EFCC will begin to be scrambled for what they can scramble. This is principally, Dr. Abati, the problem in Nigeria. The governors have more enormous power, and now they're asking for extra power. But what power should go along with accountability. The president today cannot say anything he wants. National Assembly will checkmate him. They exercise this supervisory control every now and then. They summon ministers and MDAs. The judiciary can interpret against the president. They can interpret against the agency. It was not long ago they interpreted and gave all the seats in Zamfara to PDP, up and against the governors. In the state, judges cannot give order judgment against the governor. House of Assembly cannot even raise a motion to ask anything from the governor. So who is to enforce the provision of the Constitution? Is it the bandits in the bush? And this is the reason why there are crises in the country. When laws are not being enforced to provide equity and some degree of rest among the people that, justice is actually prevailing in Nigeria, people take laws into their hands. They will fake and tell you we don't have power, we are just chief accountant of this, we are just we are not chief security officers, we are with chief logistic officers. That is when they needed some things from the federal government. I ask you the question, Dr. Rufai, do they need strategic implementation work to employ Paris Club? When Paris Club was given to them, did they come to the president and say, hey, we don't know how to implement it, let us have dialogue? They knew how to operate that. When it comes to give judiciary their money, give lawmakers their money, they say, no, we must sit with you and discuss the implementation strategy. What is there about Rufai transferring 10,000 naira into Dr. Abati's account, 20,000 naira into Tundun account? Does it require implementation? It's directive that the governor should give. And in terms of administration of the various arms in the state, judiciary have a budget, detailed expenditure, detailed estimation. The same thing with lawmakers, detailed expenditure, detailed estimation. They also have their respective accounting officers. They have their respective auditors. They have the internal mechanism of giving accountability for the money that is charged to them. But the governor will not, because he wants to control the piper. He wants to control the tune by having the control of the piper. Rufai, that is the problem. And the enforcement of the Constitution must be done by the president.
Well, Daniel Bwala, aren't we going round in circles with regard to judicial autonomy for the judiciary? You recall that in 2014, the Judicial Staff Union of Nigeria signed a memorandum of understanding with the federal government. That was not implemented. In 2015, this same Judicial Staff Union of Nigeria, its members went on strike. And subsequently, they had to go to court. Juson versus federal government. Justice Ademola ruled in favor of autonomy for judiciary, financial autonomy, that is. In another case, Agbakoba versus AGF, Attorney General of the Federation, and the NJC and the National Assembly. The same issue was before the court. The court again ruled in favor of financial autonomy for the judiciary. Now, what do you advise Juson to do at this time? The association has the support of the NBA and others. Should they just continue with the strike until this matter is resolved? Briefly.
You know, by law, civil servants, their highest form of expression of grievance is industrial action, not taking laws into their hands. That's the limitation they have. Now, sometimes they do not even have the coordination to go to court and then sue federal government. But in this case, through the association, they were able to do that. When a verdict is delivered in favor of Johnson or any other body known to law, that body, if the federal government fails to perform, fails to obey that court order, they are not supposed to just keep quiet. They should bring the relevant application to the court, why the Attorney General of the Federation should not be sent to prison for not enforcing the laws of the land. If they bring such application and the court delivers and the court summons the Attorney General, for example, the Attorney General refuses to obey, or any really agent of the Federation refuses to obey, at that point you can escalate that to the international community that Nigerian democracy is being threatened because the highest court of the land has given a judgment in respect of this, and it is not being done. And let me tell you, there are many ways international community can subject and ensure that states obey their laws, their municipal laws, and if they don't, there will be sanction. But at their own level, they can only go on strike, but they can escalate it further, because going on strike will come to a point where themselves too will not have what to get.
Okay, on that note, Dr. Daniel Bwala, we would like to thank you very much for joining us on the morning show today.